All right. We are live with the Dev Talk Show on January 22nd, 2020, which is 10 years after the year we made contact. And I'm sure very few of you out there in the audience will get that reference. But if you do, leave us a comment if you're watching in the future on YouTube, or let me know in the chat room. Thanks for joining us tonight. I have Andy Schwamm, I'm Chris Gomez, and we have Rich Ross behind the camera, tuning audio levels right now, looking very producer-like with the headphones on, and the
sneezing,
awesome swivel mic right in front of him. Hopefully not, right?
No.
That's what he does, right?
What he does, right?
Punches himself right out there. So
this doesn't happen by accident. Us looking this good.
Well,
if you could, believe me, we look really bad.
We bring the quality down.
Yeah, right.
Rich keeps it back up.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us as we're going to talk about developer topics. And if you're new to the industry, working in the industry, or just wonder what it's like to be a day-to-day developer, this is the place to be. And at the beginning of the year, last week, we were all remote. And we're working on that scenario when we need it. But now we're back in the studio at the Microsoft MTC in Malvern, right after a user group meeting that was here. And I think that was pretty successful too. So if you watch the Philly.net channel and then you've come to join us, thank you for that. And Andy, we've been looking for what different things can we talk about. And when you're on a development team, there's technologies. We've done a lot of that. Like we had a show where we talked about gRPC and we introduced it to ourselves, or we might talk about Blazor, and those are technologies. Mm-hmm. Those are frameworks you use, and they're buzzwordy. There's a lot of buzzwords in our industry, but there's a lot when you work in a team. You go to a job, and there's going to be 3 of you, 5 of you, 7 of you, maybe writing code. Let's hope not many more than that. I don't know, but that would be a different show to figure that team size out. To work together effectively,
right,
we all can't just start pounding away on our machines, because for one thing, we might all be working in the same project. Mm-hmm. So I think, you've had a lot of experience in trying to figure out how to wrestle this together, just as part of what you do. And so we thought tonight we would talk about how an effective team, what are the kind of standards they might need to think about so they can work together well, right?
Yeah. I think, like you said, there's more to the software than just writing the code. I mean, even to go back to that, we talk about DevOps, we talk about other things that relate, and other things that are important. But there's so much that goes on to, like, if you can get the team working together well and collaborating well, you're going to start building good software, right? And I think it's people talk about, what's the first thing people talk about often with developer collaboration these days? Code reviews.
Okay.
Right? Paired programming and
right.
Code reviews. And one of the bits of feedback I hear often about stuff like code reviews from developers is like, well, what is the basis of the code review? Like, what am I reviewing? Right? What developers will look at code often and they'll say, this code, you send me some code, right? I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, well, it's correct. It is going to solve the business problem, right? Your code is good, Chris. You're a good developer. You sent me good code. So I want to approve it because I feel like it's right. But on the other hand, I'm looking at that code and I'm going, well, but I don't like the way this code is written. This code doesn't look like we're going to be able to maintain this really well in 6 months when we got to come back in here, or things like that, right? It's just not going to be as extensible as we want it to be. And I think a lot of times developers say, well, I don't feel, and I'm paraphrasing here, what I get from them, but I don't feel like I have and I'm going to use this word, like the authority, right? Like, who am I to tell Chris that code was, sort of disorganized or, whatever.
Okay.
And so we, for reasons like that, and for other reasons around collaboration stuff, we talk about getting developers to work together. Having a set of standards, having some guidelines that developers follow, and a broad set of guidelines that cover a lot of different topics is really helpful. And quite frankly, we're in the process of rolling out new standards and things like that at work. And I'm getting feedback now. It could be just people blowing smoke, to me. I don't know. But generally, people have said, like, when I soft shoe it, I'm always like, oh, we're going to be bringing out these standards. And I'm thinking they're going to be, and they're like, yeah, when?
Okay.
And I'm like, wow.
You thought it might have gone differently.
Well, I will tell you that, like, as a developer, I don't know how I would be. You want to really think these things through. And how would I accept it as a developer? What I wouldn't want is someone coming in and micromanage me and telling me how to write every line of code and things like that, or how to do every single step, right? We're not robots, right? Actually, I think of software coding as quite a creative endeavor, and I enjoy that aspect of it. And so I wouldn't want to put those kind of constraints on the development team either, right? I wouldn't want to do that. But my guess was I would assume that when I first tell developers that the standards are going to be coming out, that they're going to think, oh God. Now, maybe they trust me. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. That's probably too much to assume, right? But they're enthusiastic about having a set of standards to work towards. I think they were skeptically enthusiastic, like, well, let's see what this looks like. And I talk about, like, I don't want to be. There's a couple of gotchas I was trying to avoid, right? The ivory tower architect.
Right.
Nobody wants to work with the ivory tower architect who, like, preaches down from on high and says all code will follow this. Can we get sound effects? Is that what
reverb, right?
All code can follow these standards, and that that's not, like, pragmatic. And so, we have to think about a variety of different things. And so I put a lot of thought into it, but it's interesting.
So the thing is like you said, I caught a couple things about what you said. One of them was avoiding the ivory tower, but that I think is related to, even if you believe very strongly about what you're going to ask the developers in your organization to do, putting yourself in their shoes, you're afraid that they'll say, like, oh, great, there's going to be some linter or some rules that I have to do a semicolon certain ways, or I have to indent a certain ways, or even how many spaces there are going to be, and I'm
tabs versus spaces.
Oh. And in this whole entire universe of ways to write code, even though if you're new to writing code, this may be a surprise to you, is you take any language, whether it's JavaScript or C# or Java or Go or Basic, I don't care what it is people begin to do things a way that they like and they enjoy and they're comfortable with.
Right.
I know it might seem like, well, wait a second, isn't there only one way to write computer code? And that's not true at all. There's very much an art to it, just like the art of writing a novel. There's more than one way to construct a poem, and this poem is very beautiful, and this poem is like, boy, I wasn't so much about it, but they could be telling the exact same story. So to avoid being the person coming out and announcing to the crowd after the smoke comes up from the cathedral, we have our new standards.
We have. Right? Did you get it? Wait. Rich is. I don't know if he's saying we have it or we don't have it. We don't have it. We have our new standards.
Right. And
we don't have echo. We'll have to listen back later.
And you don't want that. You don't want that. So you had to come up with a way to avoid the extreme of over managing this and the under management of I didn't really change anything. Nothing's going to be standardized. And
Chops says there are 3 ways to write the code, I guess, right? The right way, the wrong way, and my way.
Yeah.
Chops, totally agree with that kind of sentiment. Definitely. And that's, I mean, the funny thing is I do feel that way, right? I'm a type A.
Okay.
A little egotistical, probably, right? And I feel like, I've been doing this a long time. And I do think my way is right. But I think it's a good thing. I mean, I say that, but it's somewhat in jest, but in it's also good to be reflective of that and say, I know that I think my way is right. But I need to be careful of that, because deep down, I know that my way is not always right. But I try to remind myself, like, don't, just remember that you think your way is right,
Yeah.
and it might not be.
Right. Now there's more to it. You started off this whole thing by
Bruno's
talking
laughing.
about what a code review is. And at first I thought, okay, that's interesting because you brought up that the purpose of a code review is so that another developer takes a look for correctness, right? Correctness is important. But also, is this code maintainable? Is it organized well? And look, I've been part of the code review. That's practically a sign-off as long as it works. And you're right. It's because I myself am saying, I don't know if I really want to jump in here and start nitpicking. I got to work with this person.
Yeah,
I don't want them to feel bad. And besides, I don't want to feel bad when they're the one going like, "Oh, this is horrible. Stop doing that."
Exactly.
So creating what you're trying to do here, it sounds, is create a culture.
Yes.
Okay.
That's good. That's a good way of looking at it. Yep.
So this is creating a development culture, but it's a little more to it than that because, okay, there's no way in a short show that we will go over every possible kind of organizational standard. So I think we would be best to pick one or two examples.
Sure.
And at first you talked about code, but there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
Since you're rolling this out, or you used to do this as a talk at Philly.net, a full day workshop. It was similar to this. You may not have covered everything.
It is kind of similar.
It's pretty similar.
Funny. I hadn't thought of that.
And I think in that workshop, you were a little more narrowly focused on code and code organization.
Sure, you're right.
Where one of the things we talked about as we were prepping for the show is you said you're also going to roll out ideals such as we're all going to use the same source control.
Right.
Which sounds, how did that even happen? Well, in an organization that grows organically over many, many years, a team might have adopted this because it was new. A team might have adopted this because, or they're still using it.
Right.
And so you are saying we're going to do one.
Yeah. So the standard, again, I think you're right. In the interest of time, we can focus a conversation on a couple things, but there's some the standard that I'm talking about isn't necessarily what you'd said earlier.
Okay.
Like 4 spaces versus a tab, right? As a matter of fact, that's one that's not in mine because I don't really care how you do that, right? But we do care that you use Git, right? We've adopted that as a standard because, like you said, we've got developed. We still have some code that's in SVN. We still have some code that's in TF version control, and we have code that's in Git. And we want to get everyone on the same line, right? Now, this is a good example of like the approach we take and to delivering the message as to why. I feel it is important to share why with people, right? People should be able to ask questions and feel like, why are you telling me I should use, let's say, Git? And when I say Git, I'm actually talking about Git via Azure DevOps, but it doesn't really matter, right?
In general, the Git source control system, Git repositories, you're using Azure repos.
We're using Azure repos.
But would this, let's say you had GitHub Enterprise, this would all still apply.
Oh, sure, exactly. It doesn't really matter.
Right. So it's not about the in this particular case, you're not specifically saying, but it just makes sense for you to use it because it's already in the org.
Well, no, we have the org, and we're not letting people deviate.
Yeah.
You can't put your own code up in some other repo.
Yeah.
I don't think any developer
and that's
suggesting.
A fair point too. It's not some affinity for a specific platform of Git, but you've already got it. You should all be in one place. That makes sense.
And the important part here, with the reason of why. First of all, I think we all know that Git is sort of the way forward. Until there's a new way forward, Git is the way forward. TF version control was great for a while. SVN was great for a while, but it's Git now, right? We want to enable, among many things. We should have. So how about this? We should go back a step and say, if you're going to have some sort of standards, you should have a mission. Like, what are these standards helping us achieve, right? So we're trying to achieve collaboration. And when we talk about code, a lot of stuff we're talking about is how to build maintainable, extensible code that's easy to work on. And those are the general problems in an enterprise like where I work, I think. So I want to enable collaboration. So I need to know, and some of this is me wearing my manager hat, like managing the teams and deciding, and I don't make all the decisions on this, but I help decide like, hey, maybe we should throw more resources on this team, right?
Okay.
Well, I can't throw Chris, go over there and work with Rich if they're on SVN and you've never seen SVN.
Okay.
Like, it's just it's a barrier.
Right.
It's overcomeable, but it's just not worth having that barrier. And that's what I would say. Is it really worth it? It's not that big a deal. Switch to Git, kind of thing like that. But it enables collaboration. There's a reason that we want to have a standard. We could say, hey, each team do whatever you want, right? And it wouldn't be, in this case, it wouldn't be a total disaster, right? The code would be in source control. The first rule is you have to use source control.
Yeah.
Right? Second
Which sounds like, it's funny. I imagine even a lot of you folks watching, like, that should have just been a given. However, so we still walk into places and say, oh
yeah,
mercy.
Totally.
Their source control system is that file share is yesterday's version, and this file share is where we finished today.
Yeah, totally. By the way, so I can't help but notice, I happened to look down on the stream and saw that on Mixer, it's called Bots and More. Now, is that because my page didn't refresh?
I think it just didn't refresh.
Oh, my page didn't. So Mixer's right? I'm going to refresh my screen here because I'm just curious. Oh, yeah, successful dev team standard. Awesome. Hey, listen, speaking of that, what do we want to remind people to do?
If you're watching on Mixer or Twitch, follow the channel. And if you're watching us on YouTube, do the same thing. Subscribe to this channel. And if you are watching us in the future, make sure that you write a comment on some of the things we're talking about and like the topic.
Yeah. So the other thing, with all the standards that I think we should have, again, this is a lot of opinion. But I think, again, it's a pragmatic approach. Recognize that there's an exception to every rule. Don't say it must 100% be Git.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a scenario where developers are going to say, I know this, I don't know, maybe the Git example isn't the best one, but we've got a project that just doesn't integrate with Git. For some reason, there's just no way to do it.
Tons of media assets could be an issue.
I was thinking about that.
Or maybe somebody says, we've come up with a really nifty way to manage our SQL database code.
Right.
And it's just better this other way.
Right. So just again on the concept of standards, or whatever we're calling it, standards guidelines, the one thing I would add is that what I'm asking the team to say is, if you're laughing over there, but if there's an exception, exception should be noted, right? If you're not going to follow it, let's discuss it. Let's make sure it's sort of approved, and let's note it, because what you don't want to have is new developers kind of come on and go, oh, hey, these guys are using this thing over here. I guess that's okay.
Right.
And, we don't want that to sort of lead to things falling apart. So let's note why we're, going off script or something like that.
Right.
And that's pragmatic.
Definitely. I mean, the team you're working on today, at the end of the project may not be the same team you work on with the next project, right? So you all got to work together and potentially work with some people who may have different opinions for whatever reason. So let's figure out what those are.
Right. Exactly. So I'm wondering, for people that are watching.
And then you can say it's my way.
You can say it's my way, right? That's the other good thing. Someone asked me today, I'm obviously not going to call it names. Someone asked me today, well, who comes up with these standards and what happens if we don't agree?
Right.
And I said, well, first of all, I came up with most of them, but quite frankly, based on successful things I've seen in our organization, but I put them on paper, right? And another, one of my coworkers who's at the same level as me is, reviewing it all with me, but I kind of type most of it into the document. But what happens if you don't agree?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to know if you don't agree, because you might be right.
Sure. Might be something you hadn't thought of, or opinion you hadn't heard before.
There's a good chance that's the case, right? Second is, well, can we come up with a compromise? Can we say there's you have an edge case, whatever. What do we want to do? But then I said, listen, but at the end of the day, I got to tell you, this might be, call it a benevolent dictatorship if you want, but that's what work's all about. And we know who's going to win. I don't want to be that guy.
No.
But we know who's going to win, and that's okay. I hope, So, yeah, it's sort of like Chop says, there's my way is the right way, and it might not be the right way.
So I think what we'll probably come back to is that part of this is making the right selections as to what you're going to make an organizational standard and what you're going to not care about.
Yeah.
We didn't quite get into what you don't care about. I noted that we talked about, like, we're not going to care about tabs versus spaces. What else are we not going to care about, or at least you've chosen not to care about? And you may have different opinions.
I would love to see comments. Yeah, comments.
Definitely.
Throw in what you don't care about. So stay on Git for a second.
Okay.
What don't I care about with Git? Well, let's say we care that we're going to use Git. We've talked about this. You're a command line guy, right? I like the tooling. Okay. I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Like, use it however you want to use it, right? Now, some people would say, well, we have a standard that's all developers will, I don't know why, but you can imagine someone saying, all developers will right-click in Visual Studio to commit their changes or something like that.
As long as it gets in there.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Right? So that's certainly something that we don't care about.
Right.
What else don't we care about? What I talked about, if we want to talk about things I don't care about, I tend to think of examples that relate to code, writing code.
Well, let's stay with Git for one more moment, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Because I would like to go to other things.
Okay, yeah.
But maybe this will keep us grouped.
Yeah,
and we
please,
can walk away from Git for the rest of the show, right?
Yeah.
And I'm throwing monkey wrenches at you.
Yeah,
You wasn't
sure.
prepared. These are snowballs, right?
Yeah.
What about branching strategy?
Branching strategy. So we are proposing a branching strategy by the way, the example that I'm talking about is not just a team standard, a small development team, but I'm talking about enterprise standard across teams, right? We are suggesting using like what's commonly referred to as feature branching. I know there's other ways to do branching.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's other right ways to do branching, but in my experience, and most of the developers that I've worked with tend to gravitate, we like that feature branching, we think it reduces complexity. But I'm also saying, and what we really don't want to do is no one should be listening to this saying, Andy just said the standard should be feature branching.
No.
We should adopt feature branching.
This is what you're doing.
This is what I'm doing because it fits in with the kind of code we develop. And I don't know if I'm right, but I always thought, you talk about another example, which is like those developer branch, QA branch, production branch. I feel like those scenarios tend to work really well in large organizations where there's a person whose job is to merge things and move things and I don't know. We don't have that.
Right.
We have a bunch of developers that do merge, commit code. We don't build a lot of cross-team applications where everything needs to come together perfectly. A lot of times teams are building their software.
Yeah.
Smaller teams. We have exceptions to that.
Sure.
So I'm suggesting feature branching because I think it works well for the code we do. Now, the team today said, let me throw a wrinkle into that because here's a scenario that we have. And I said, I hadn't thought of that. So I said, let's take a look at your situation specifically and figure out if we can come up with something that either we add to the standard or we just do slightly different for you guys. But maybe we add it to the standard as an option,
right? Because
they have a scenario that they need a little differently.
So let me bring up something. This is on the Atlassian website. Atlassian makes Bitbucket, and the reason I bring it up is that this documentation, this has been here a very long time. In fact, they're kind of famous for this. So, Rich, if you can bring up my screen real quick. They're a little famous for having had this document for a while where they compare some different Git workflows. These are their names, and I shouldn't even say that they made these names up. We can go searching on the web and we will find the terms like Git flow, and so we will find these terms. So they compare centralized workflow and then feature branch workflow and Git flow workflow and forking workflow, and I don't really feel like you're trying to prescribe that. You're just trying. I think what I'm hearing you say is, I want you to start some work on a branch and then merge it into master instead of doing the work right on master.
Well, certainly don't want to do work right on master. Yeah, we're saying do a branching like that feature branch, like you just said, do work in a branch and merge it into master. Yeah.
Right. But I don't know that you're going so far as to saying, go ahead.
Rich, I'm not seeing his screen. Sometimes it's easier if I can see your screen here, so I can read along. Why am I?
Did you not put the?
I'm using Studio
Monitor.
Yeah, I can see your screen. I just don't see.
Oh, but I'm not using NDI.
Oh, you're
No,
not
he's-
using
he's
it.
direct plug.
I'm still direct plug. I haven't figured that out yet.
No, you should
I'd
be
like
able
to
to
get to that point.
So I can get it off the TriCaster.
I was gonna say you should be able to get the
And
TriCaster
what is it?
feed.
In what number is it?
He is in 5.
Okay, so I should be able to see off the TriCaster. There's a lot of equipment that makes this
Yeah.
thing work here.
Who knew?
Does not seem to be working. So
So I
it's
actually
okay.
do recommend to folks watching. I do recommend that you should that you should. It wouldn't be a horrible idea to read some of this.
Yeah, so
and,
Bruno's saying that he has a
yeah,
branch
I should
per
have read it.
environment, right? 3 in total. And he was the one merging the changes to deploy. So he was acting, I think that's what you're saying, Bruno, right? You were the merge master or the merge captain or whatever we want to call it. And
I just you can go back to us.
Okay.
Sorry.
what happened with your screen? I don't know what that is.
I just
So,
minimized it.
Bruno, if you could add one more thing, what I'd like to hear is, were you happy with that? Was that a successful way to do things, or was that problematic for you? You know, if you give us a little bit
Yeah.
more, I'm curious, because what I'm saying is what works for me is maybe not what works for you
Well,
in different kind of code.
And I think this is a whole other show. So I'm
Oh,
gonna
sure,
I'm
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
leave
right,
it to
right.
a sentence.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why confusion reigns here is using Git as a source control collaboration system is slightly different from using it as a release trigger. And we do use our source control systems for both.
Yeah.
We use it to be a release trigger
Yeah,
by
yeah.
merging into this branch.
Check into master triggers a release.
Means
Yeah.
go do some automated stuff.
Mhm.
But playing in feature branches or forks or however you want to collaborate, that's just us working. And I think if you can keep that straight in your head that we do use our source control systems for 2 things,
Right.
but we don't talk about it very much that way, then that maybe will allow you to not get so hung up on, oh my gosh, the branching workflow. Well, no, hold on a second. The purpose of that branch is really to trigger automation. It's not necessarily a collaboration thing. That's the way I like to talk about it when I do Git workshops. And I think that's a whole other show and a whole other workshop.
Right.
But
Bruno does say here, by the way, yeah, it works for them. And I say, that's where you come up with your standard, right? What works for you guys? What makes your team successful?
yeah,
Right. And that's great. And by the way, really appreciate jumping in and adding to the conversation here.
Yeah, definitely.
This is like fun. I love the conversation like that.
yeah.
This is-
So let's.
What's that?
I was gonna say this is where we'd love to be able to plunk down the line and say Bruno from
Oh,
wherever,
yeah.
right?
Pick him
that's-
up on the call.
Yeah.
Hey, Bruno's on the phone.
Trust,
Yeah.
we have thought about that.
Yeah.
So stay tuned
Some
for,
point.
for call in. We're thinking about
Like
how we
voice,
can
you're
do it.
saying voice
Yeah,
calling.
I
Get
think
your
sure,
voice
get
on.
people
Yeah, we
on
could
the
do
line.
that.
I think
Totally.
it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And so I've been creating a list here as we've gone. We don't have to go to it yet. Maybe we'll review it at the
Okay.
end.
Okay.
But I noticed, so I'm trying to take this into what you're not caring about, what you are caring
Yeah.
about. We're going to care that we're using specific source control, but I don't care what tooling you use. The outcome of it is more important.
Sure.
I am going to care that you use feature branches, but I'm not going to care if you use some specific workflow like Git flow. Are you caring about what the branches are called?
I was just gonna say I don't even care
Some people
what they're called.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah,
That's-
I don't think
that's
it
a
matters.
team
Now,
concern,
I will
maybe?
say
Maybe?
one of the things we're thinking about doing. I'm really glad because here's a chance to bounce ideas off you.
Yeah.
We're already running into, excuse me, a lot of repos, right? A lot of repos. We've got, I don't know how many development teams. Let's say there's 10 development teams, and each one of them has, some of them have tens of repos. 50 repos or so. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. So, do you put to organize those? Git doesn't have folders, right? To like proper folders like you got with TF version control.
Well, kind of, but
They kind
go
of
on.
do. What
Yeah.
I'm thinking about doing is saying that, and I've read some people say, do not do this. I want to get your take. Should a repo start with like team name? Like, let's say you have a UI team and a backend team. Should it be UI.application1, UI.application2, UI.application3? And that way, the UI team can find their stuff. Well, it's easy when they're all application 1, but you might have alpha 1 and zeta 5, two names of your
Yeah, I hear what
application.
you're saying.
So you
Right.
group them together by putting a team name on there. But I've seen other people say that's like an anti-pattern in Git because products move from team to team sometimes,
Yeah.
switch things, and then the response I got back from someone when I mentioned that to them is they said, "Yeah, but you rename it. Like, is that a big deal?" So, thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's too bad that things like GitHub's organizations or Azure Repos projects don't quite solve the problem here, because you'd like them to. You'd like to say that those two things are places to group like projects, but then you have a whole identity problem, because it wouldn't just be enough to move the project. Now I got to make sure. Well, are you on the team? And
well, there's other problems that go along with that. So
right.
you take that.
So
out.
that's probably not what that's for.
Right.
So what's interesting is, even I think, as you've even seen Microsoft work through this, right? There's a Microsoft organization and there's a .NET .NET organization, and if I remember correctly, .NET Core began life in the ASP.NET organization.
And they moved it, yeah.
And then they moved it. And so so you're talking, here's a big enterprise that has literally millions of developers depending on them not breaking them, and they still made these changes because they just felt like, hey, as we've matured this project, this little experiment, .NET V Next, we see some rearranging that has to happen, and so we're gonna try and shout it from the rooftops and get people to follow us there. So I think that you could probably dwell too much on this and maybe try something.
Right, because it's just not that hard to change
and
back.
Then change it.
Yeah, so we're thinking about trying that. So you were saying, that's Git, right? We're saying use Git. As a comparison, and maybe this isn't the direction, as a quick note, some things we do care about tooling.
Okay.
You might say you call this tooling, but certainly in our standard says you have to have automated builds and automated deployments. Okay. Of course, there's an exception, whatever. Let's not get into exceptions.
Right.
Have to have automated builds and automated releases. But from a tooling perspective, I am saying that we're going to use ARM templates when you're doing Azure resources, right? And we are saying that for a build in Azure pipelines, I think builds should be done as YAML definition builds because of the benefit of having them go into source control and things like that, right? So you could say in that case, we are prescribing the tooling that you use. It's a little more than just saying you have to have a build, but you have to have a YAML build, right? Okay. And again, I don't want to go too far into that topic, but that's another example of the kind of standard we have. I'm not saying you have to have these 3 steps in your build, right? I'm not saying that you have to name your parameters for your build in such a way or anything like that, but you have to have a build. You have to have automation. That seemed like a pragmatic standard. And is that the kind of level that our standard should be, or should we be more detailed than that?
I think it seems like the minimum, and depending on the team, you might go more than that. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say that you need to have some kind of a build as part of what you're doing, so you have an automated process. Because given, at the developer level, right-click, publish out of Visual Studio, I'm done, right? You don't want that happening, and you want to make it a little more repeatable.
Yeah, I just wrote down a word you said in my notes here, minimum. And I hadn't thought about it specifically from that perspective, but I think everything I've tried to do with standards is say, let's do the minimum. We can make them stricter. We can make them more specific, right? But as non-ivory tower way of doing things, what is the minimum set of standards that we should have to enable developers to be effective and successful, but not be constricted?
Yeah, let's all agree that we can start here.
Start here. That's what it is. It's a start.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that word, minimum. Yeah.
Cool.
So we've talked a lot about source control. One thing that we didn't talk about that folks might not think where we were going is we briefly mentioned that, so one thing that this set of standards doesn't say is it doesn't say tabs versus spaces. It doesn't say that your tab indentation is 8. It doesn't say, I'm going to just make this one up. It doesn't say that if you're writing a link query that's a fluent link query that dots several times, that they all have to be lined up on the left, or they have to be
Oh,
lined
that's a
up,
good one. Yeah,
you know,
lining
right?
up,
Or do they have to be lined up so that the dots line up?
Well, should they? Like, I don't
Well,
do that, but
that's what-
should they? What do you think?
Should it be a standard that it is?
I've seen people have standards that say
Yeah.
text can't wrap. You can't go more than 80 columns, whatever they call it, 80 characters in on a line. You have to have wrapping. I don't want to do that.
I've worked
No.
within development standards that say that private members had to have an underscore or an M underscore, which I know is very, for those of you who might remember Hungarian notation, like.
Well, I am
Right?
going with the underscore for private class level variables.
Okay.
And
you
I know
want that in there.
And that I put in there because
Okay.
that, to me, when it comes to naming, I'm kind of saying there's an established .NET naming convention.
Sure.
I've seen docs for that. I
Right.
don't have it up right now. We could bring it up. But I think using the underscore, I think, is a conflict with that standard. And I find it really helpful. And so let me cut to the end here. So as I tell developers that I think that should be our standard, I've had I think most of them have said, yeah, no, I like that. I like the underscore. And I've had some that go, oh no, not the underscore.
Yeah.
I think the underscore is good. It tells you this is a class. This is scoped at a class. It's not just private within a, you know what I mean, class level. But so that's one that is in there, and that's one of the more specific ones. But no, I don't think we should tell people like how many spaces should be. I don't think that really makes the code more maintainable or more extensible. It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to change developers' ability to work in that project,
Right.
so much. Now, one thing that I could see developers talking about, I've had so many conversations over the years with developers about the var keyword.
Yeah.
Should we have a standard that says you always use the var keyword, or you never use the var keyword unless, of course, you need the var keyword? I don't care, right?
Yeah.
Should, go back to minimum. Does that really matter? That's not changing the code. You could argue, so I could hear someone say, well, it's sure more readable if you don't have the var keyword. And I would say, well, I don't know.
Can be.
I'm kind of used to it. I'm just saying I could see people.
Yeah. I think it
Make that
depends
pitch.
what your, like if it's, I don't know, if it's var foo equals some new object, then it's no more readable because you see what the object is. But if it's var
Sure, of
foo
course.
equals
Get something.
some method and you have
right.
no clue what it's sending you
You
back,
always
then
know
it's
what's coming
probably
back.
right.
So that's different. That would be the standard. It says your code should be readable.
Yeah,
And if I don't know what it is,
but that's a fuzzy standard, right?
it's a fuzzy standard. And that's a good, to me, that's a good use case for a code review. That's the kind of thing where I would say during a code review, and I would hope other developers would, hey, you think this code is readable. Quite frankly, readability is one of those ones where it's an easy win in a code review. If I've got someone looking at my code and they say, I know you think, Andy, that this code is really readable, but I didn't understand what it meant.
Right.
I got my answer there. They didn't understand what it meant. I'm wrong, right? And I should go and take away the var keyword or add the var, whatever it is.
Something.
Right?
Yeah.
But here's another one that comes in here. V double equals null versus is null. And so, wow. Those are the kind of things that, like, I want to give people like, I don't want to go to that level, right? And I don't know if Bruno's saying we should go to that level or just the kind of thing that he's seen. But I'm trying to not go to a level like that. And I'm also not sure if that's the same. I was trying to, are those exactly, to me, that's like double equals null or is null. Yeah. I don't want to get to that level, like in my standard.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what do you think? Like, this isn't me,
So-
right? This is what do you guys think?
So what's interesting here is that apparently at one time there was some debate over this, and because we have Roslyn, which is the newer C# compiler that the C# team finds much easier, they're much more nimble with C# since they rebuilt C# in Roslyn. They've even Mads and everyone company is all Mads Torgerson has all said that it has enabled so much for them, and so the Roslyn compiler was updated at one point to make those equivalent except when there is no, if you haven't overloaded the equality operator.
Well, that's right.
Obviously, if you've overloaded it, then it's whatever you want.
Right.
So certainly in terms of making sure the code does what you think it does, there are folks who say you should use is because we all know precisely what that does.
Because there's no ambiguity of an overloaded equals operator.
I would still today, and I say this without having had to yet stay up an entire weekend fighting a bug related to this, that's the kind of micro management that I would probably be willing to let go.
So it should not be in the standard.
I probably wouldn't put it in the standard.
But it's a good topic it's still a good topic for a code review, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, is it clear? It's interesting. So I wouldn't put something in there, but now I got to admit I'm kind of interested. Like, oh, maybe that is a good one.
So here's one that I think is a little bit lower hanging fruit. Interfaces in the .NET world all start with an I.
Yep.
Okay, now our friends in Java think we're crazy because they did not come out of the womb, so to speak, with interfaces that start with I. We have that. I mean, this is an opinion, but it's based, I think it's a pretty well-researched, educated observation of the history of .NET.
Okay.
We were born with a .NET framework where the team that built the base class framework used I on all their interfaces.
Yeah,
I disposable was in the box on day one.
Right.
I comparable, I equatable, they were there. And so in some respects,
right?
I'm going to use a little bit negative. We're stuck with it because if we three choose to do something different, then we bring another developer in and it's like, well, wait a second, what did you do here?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I have been on a project where the developer clearly, and I'm not saying this in any negative way, clearly they came from another platform, and I suspect it was Java. In Java, they just simply don't identify interfaces, and the reasoning is this.
Yeah.
The interface is what you should be programming to. The implementation can have an ugly name, and we never see it. So it is very common in the Java world to write your implementation as like something impl. So let's say
do it the opposite way, right?
They go uglify the.
That's actually really kind of interesting because
you might even start to like it if you think about it for a little bit.
If I wrote, I'm going to put some stuff in the chat here because it's an easy place for me to type. Although I'm chatting into Mixer and
we can put it here in OneNote too.
So yeah, okay, yeah, I can put it on screen. I didn't even think about that. So if I said I had a variable that was a string and I called it str first name, I hope you would hate it. My head would explode.
Sure.
Okay. Because why do I need to say that it's a string?
Right.
But that's what we're doing with interfaces.
I'll bring it up here.
But that's what we're doing with interfaces, right?
So it's to you, Chris?
Yeah. So where I'm typing here in the middle here, we don't name our strings in .NET. We don't name them stir first name.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
But we do I.
But we do name our interfaces. I wouldn't want to say I person because that wouldn't be a name. That
yeah. Well, you could call it first name
operable.
Yeah, sure, whatever it is. Right.
So whatever this thing is, it's operable.
Yeah. Well, so that's an interesting point. Is I was comparing it to a simple property, but not a method or not a class.
I just happen to know that, and I don't want to speak for every Java developer. If you're a Java developer and you don't do it this way, but my understanding is that Java developers tend to leave the interface alone. Right.
Yeah.
The interface would be machinable.
Yeah.
Meaning that this class is you can run it through a machine.
Whatever that.
I'm totally making this up.
Yeah. No, I get it.
And then what you would do is if it's something you run through a washing machine, it can be run through a washing machine. You would say washing machinable. You might do this. You wouldn't have to, because it's clear enough.
Yeah. Right? Now the problem is what happens when they're the same.
Right.
Most of the time, so much like of us nowadays have.
So the idea would be that if for some reason you need to have an implementation with the same name as the interface, then you would put impl on the end of it, where we would go machinable and iMachinable. Right. So,
but here's the thing. Right.
This is what I really wanted to get at. You're going to expect developers to put an I in front of their interfaces. You will put that in the standard if you have to.
It's not. I don't know if it's. I can't remember if it's in the standard or not. I can look because I have the document
Well,
here.
probably because you think who wouldn't do it?
Because who wouldn't do?
Who wouldn't do it?
What
So
kind
it's
of pig? What kind of animal? What kind of world do we live in?
But it is a way of saying you expect idiomatic code. Now, what about there's the should you use the string class or the string keyword? Right? Is
Yeah,
that
so I put that on there. I typed that in because it was easier to type it than explain it, right? I put in string with a capital S or string with a lower S. I have my feelings of what the right answer here is, by the way, and I'm right.
Because they're your standards.
But it's not in the standard. I am not telling developers which one to use.
Okay.
But I gotta tell you, when I look at code, if someone uses a capital S string, I'm bugged out about it, man. Do you guys use a capital S string? You're not supposed to. I was taught originally that while string is the real thing, just like int with a lower I integer with a capital I is the
int
real.
32 is the real.
Int 32 is the real thing.
It's real int.
That we're supposed to use the alias, I believe they're called, or something like that.
It's a keyword. And it represents the same .NET type.
But someone said this once, and it was someone in I believe it was someone from like a .NET team, like a real, not me, like an idiot, like someone at Microsoft. I could be wrong. I think it was someone from said the reason for that was that one day, int 32 might no longer be the int as the standard, and they have the ability to say we're going to make 64 always int.
Right.
And our code would work somehow.
Right.
You know, it would allow for that flexibility.
Right.
But anyway, it's not in the standard because I just don't think it matters that much that I'm going to be busting people's chops, or when I say or
you wouldn't change it in a code review.
Yeah, I might mention it, but I wouldn't care if the developer said, I really like it. Like I don't.
There's a little history to it too. If we were able to go back in time and look at some of the MSDN magazine articles and some of the very, very early writings about .NET from the Microsoft base class, the folks who built this stuff, they were using, in many, many cases, capital S string. String.empty, string.is null or empty, stuff like that. It took actually...
Well, string.empty is different. That's it. Well...
But you could still say lowercase s, you could still do it.
But that's an extension method on the... I don't know. So hang on. I will say this. If I'm doing string.isEmpty... or whatever
capital
the heck it is.
Yes.
Yeah, I use the capital
S. But
S.
you don't have to.
But you don't have to.
Right. Now, here's my standard here. The standard that I'm giving you is that in a code review, you're probably not going to stop somebody from using the lowercase s or uppercase S string, as long as it's not crazy, but you will probably raise an eyebrow if they declare a variable using int32 and not int.
Yeah.
You'll probably go, That's just not what anyone else is going to write.
That is weird. Yeah, that's right.
But yet we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, we are.
And I'm being a little unfair here and kind of hijacking the conversation just to say,
it's interesting.
Isn't it weird how historically our language and work has evolved here?
But see, this kind of conversation is really important, right?
Right.
Because it gives us like that frame of reference. Like as someone who's writing a standard, are we putting standard in for practical reasons, or like why are we doing this? And like this is like a good gut check. It's good to think these things through and realize at the same time that there's weirdisms or whatever the word is.
Weird things have happened.
There's weirdisms, and how do we deal with that?
So two things that kind of came up as we were having that last bit of conversation, or at least in my mind as we were walking through it. It seems that there are de facto standards that we don't even have to say are standards. That whole implementation thing, when you think about it from the .NET perspective, it's just there. I don't even have to mention it. You guys already get it. So there are some of those that potentially you get someone who comes from another language and decides that this is how we used to do it over there.
Right.
Oh, and I didn't tell you how that person adjusted to C# life.
How did that?
Is they recognized that I was the right thing to do because it was idiomatic, but the interfaces were not like I disposable, I equatable, I comparable. They would be like this. I write to databases, taking the letter I and turning it into a personification of the interface.
Right.
And clearly this was somebody who, and I'm not trying to say, this is actually a very good developer, right?
It's interesting. Yeah, no, it's an interesting way of looking at it.
He couldn't let go of the training he was coming from, which was the I is it's superfluous, and you could tell it was eating away at him. So he wanted it to no longer be superfluous
Right.
by making it purpose, giving it purpose.
It's personifying the class. I write to databases, where you and I might have said, I database writer.
Yeah.
That's probably what we would have done.
Yeah.
Or even, we might have even done something dumber.
I don't
been
hate that
like
guy's
IDB
name.
writer, right?
Yeah,
We might have done something like that.
Right,
Which then we think about and like, okay, here we go with
well,
we can have that whole
abbreviations.
conversation too.
Abbreviations is another thing that is not in the standard. But wait, so going back to what you said, like
Yeah.
there is sort of these accepted standards, but not when how often do we take a JavaScript developer and say, hey, can you help out? Why don't you learn some C#?
Right.
Like, they don't know that stuff. They don't know it.
I agree.
So should it be written down? No, what I think I'm going to do is put a link in the standard to that .NET.
To their stand.
To that .NET standard, which is pretty widely accepted these days. I mean, I think it's a pretty.
The .NET Framework guidelines, or no?
I guess if I Google like .NET naming conventions, it shows.
You'll
up.
find something.
Yeah, you find it. It's the one.
No, but it was interesting. To work in that code base.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. So what else we got?
One other thing.
Oh, yeah.
So if there's de facto standards that we don't mention, there are standards that are in your document. Are there things in your document that may be more guideline versus standard? It's kind of like, almost like it'd be great, because I haven't read the standards, but it almost seems like, we don't really want to make this standard, but this is kind of something we typically do.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, in my mind, there is. I'm trying to think of like exact examples, but because to me, a standard is something that's very like quantifiable. Like,
sure,
we'll use an I in front of an interface.
Absolutely.
However, there are other things where, let's say, talking about like solid principles, which is something I'm a big fan of, and
Yep.
Well, I don't know if we say that you must follow solid like to the letter, because they are different letters.
Because each letter means something, right?
But it's sort of more of a guideline. Like, we want to achieve as far into this as possible, or something like that.
Yep.
Some of them are. Maybe it's about a degree of vagueness. A standard we have is about unit testing. There's nothing in my standard, or I should say our standard. I find myself saying my because
Taking
it's
ownership
mine,
yeah.
But it belongs to a group of us.
Right.
We nowhere in it does it say you will have 87.5% code coverage on all classes, or 100% code, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just not a specific number, but there's an encouragement. We will get better at code coverage. We will improve our code coverage on commits. We will, and I think maybe that's kind of what you're saying, where it's more of a fuzzy, it's not super specific.
Yeah.
But
it's getting towards, I think, what you would, when you think about the solid principles and Bob Martin and all those kind of discussions, we're leaving the code better than we got it.
Well, sure.
And I think, that's the unwritten, potentially the unwritten rule, I guess you're saying there.
Right. I've also, we're trying to not state things that don't need to be stated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, there's been some suggestion that we add more definitions into here, and I'm kind of like, well, this isn't a tutorial of how to do, like, in the document it doesn't say like, here's how you write unit tests.
Right.
It's not a tutorial. It's please write unit tests.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't say please.
Okay. So like one of the way I got out of it is you're going to ask today where you're at is we're going to ask you to unit test. We're going to ask you to increase your code coverage, but we're not going to pick a percentage and put that as a gate that could stop your builds.
Yeah, we're not. Should we? I don't know. We talked about minimum.
Yeah.
I'm kind of feeling like, let's see how this goes.
Yeah.
Let the developers be empowered to make progress without having Big Brother like totally looking over them, right? And let them learn to make those decisions on, like, listen, I take a pragmatic approach to unit testing. We can go into big conversations about that. I don't believe in 100% code coverage. and I don't believe I just have my own ways of doing it, right? I do believe in the value of unit tests really high. Like, don't get me started. Like, unit tests are great.
Right.
But, if you have an old code base that is going to take some time, that's another pragmatic, I think, approach we take to this is, at no point do we say, starting tomorrow, you will be following these guidelines, right? There's some guidelines in here that we put in. I'm sort of changing topics, but there's something in the guidelines here that I know we don't have a single instance of in any of our code. Like, none of our existing code base follows something that's in here.
Can you share what that is? Because that would be interesting
Well, you know what? I take
it's
that
okay
back.
if you can't.
So no, I can. There is one application that follows it, but I mean, I can tell you none of my code has ever followed it, which is to use Swagger. I'm saying that when we build an API, we should use Swagger.
Sure.
And so my point here is that these guidelines, the standard and guidelines, doesn't get implemented like tomorrow. It's how do we get more compliant? How do we get more? So if we're 0 compliant on this, that doesn't mean it doesn't go into standard though. We don't go, well, you shouldn't put it in there because we don't have any of that. No, we recognize we're all work in progress.
Yeah.
Right? And we're going to get there. And I'm not sure. I sort of diverged from the topic, and so I'm kind of confused how to bring it back to where we started.
No, it's fine. But I mean, it's interesting. See, what I like about what you just pointed out there with Swagger is it does sort of change the conversation a little bit. It takes us away from a practice, which is using unit tests to increase code coverage, where we just went through the knots and the what you're going to prescribe and what you're not going to. You said you're not going to require a quality, because some organizations or teams might do this. You got to get to this percentage of code coverage, and you're saying we're not going to do that yet.
Hey, I'm not saying they're wrong. I suppose
if it became a problem, you might say, well, maybe we got to put a number in here. Right. But let's see how it goes was your response, and I kind of like that. But I'm going to guess, and I put this in for you, you're probably going to stop a build where a unit test in the source fails.
Oh, yeah.
So that's prescriptive. That's like, you can't have a unit test fail and we're going to ship. Right. Now, we all know that developers might go comment that unit test out, right? We know that that's a possibility.
Have I done it? Have you done it?
Sure. I've done it. But sometimes you might have had a good reason because it turns out the design of the code really is changing.
Sure. Yeah,
and other times you just can't figure out how to fix the unit test or fix the code to pass. One of the two.
Right.
So that's a practice. I'm going to call that a practice. Mm-hmm. When you say, I'm going to use Swagger when I build ASP.NET-based web APIs, that's a tool choice.
Yeah.
And that goes along with something we haven't brought up yet.
Okay.
But teams might come to you asking for my favorite ORM, or should we go with what Microsoft's building? And that could be a whole show in itself.
Yeah, I thought we actually did. Maybe we didn't talk about that. Yeah, that's an example where we are prescribing. I'm using that word, prescribe.
Yeah,
we are prescribing, like, for that. We're using Entity Framework now. We have teams that use other ORMs.
Yeah.
But to me, this is one of those cases where it's just not worth using a different ORM, as far as I can tell, right? You could say, I've heard people say, well, this ORM is, half a millisecond faster than another ORM or something like that. And I'm sure it is. I'm not, I don't want to get in trouble here. Maybe Entity Framework is not the best ORM. But it is sort of like a de facto standard, I think, in the .NET world. And talk about allowing teams to collaborate. I can pretty much assume that if I need help and I say, Chris, come over, can you look at this code that I'm working on? You're going to know how to use Entity Framework. But if I've got some other ORM in there, you're going to be like, I can't help you now.
First, I got to understand how Dapper works or whatever.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, to me, the pragmatic approach to, I think, the pragmatic, maybe that could be the title of the show, pragmatic guidelines and standards or something like that, right? I don't know.
Sure.
Is it worth it? Is there something specific about that, that tool, let's say that ORM, that really overrides the need for just using Entity Framework or something? Believe me, if Entity Framework doesn't solve the problem, if there's something it can't do, then we got to use a different tool.
Yeah.
Right. But if all things are equal and maybe, certain developers have an affinity to another RM because it's what they used at like another job, or, whatever. They may have years of experience with it. To me, maybe I'm being a little on the ivory tower or whatever it is, but it's just not worth it. Like, I don't care.
Okay.
Let's just use entity framework because we're trying to. What is the goal of our standards and our guidelines? It's to do certain things. One of them is to enable collaboration, to enable that, right? And having differences where there's not really a reason to have a difference. I say,
right. And you could always, if a better tool or something comes along, or if Microsoft changes direction, you could always change that later.
Certainly.
But the key here is, I think maybe I'm going to try to restate what you're saying a different way, and I know I'm completely putting words in your mouth, but it's that you're trying to build a dome around the whole universe of possible technologies, be as inclusive as you need to be, but no more. So that way your developers can work together with a minimum of having to, just to help you today, I got to go learn this whole other thing.
Yeah.
This is probably an easier one because I still want to focus on this subset of I've picked.
It's hard. There's so many
tools and some of this is practices.
Right.
Like, to me, when we talked about automated builds, when we talked about solid principles, unit testing, and idiomatic code, I kind of grouped those things in. Well, there was coding and then there was practices. This is you're selecting tools now. And so, okay, I think it would be pragmatic for an organization to say, hey, I know that front-end web development changes like nothing else,
right.
But we are going to at least try to pick one of these, whether it's React or Angular or Vue, or, the newer things like Gatsby, which I'm totally just throwing out there because I want to keep adding to the number of frameworks that we can talk about here. Because it is true.
Hang on a second. What just happened? Are we down?
We're not down. The TriCaster seems to be having an issue.
No, we're down. Like, I got a black screen here on
You do. There's still audio.
But we still have audio first.
There's no video.
So let's not say anything bad yet, right?
Yeah,
so it's not
hang on, folks.
A blackout.
We know there is a problem with the video.
I think the TriCaster is having a little bit of a hiccup.
Yeah.
Working on it now. So the audio, we think audio is up?
Audio should be up because I got the meters going.
Can we?
I'm
sorry. I was wondering if we should keep talking. We can keep talking because, quite frankly, video is not really all that relevant to hear.
Right.
So if audio's up, we can sort of keep talking.
Bear with me 1 second.
Yeah. Bruno says audio is fine. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Bruno.
So to the point was.
So Rich will fix it, and we can keep talking.
The point is that are you going to prescribe a JavaScript framework for your front ends?
Yes. Yeah, and I think video just is coming back up or something. I don't know what's.
I just put a screen. Put a screen. It's okay.
Good move.
I'm gonna reboot the TriCaster, which will kill the audio.
Nice. We'll kill the audio. So audio might flip. How long? Well, that's gonna boot for a minute. Big box there.
Yeah. If I can force it. Keep talking.
We are picking. As a matter of fact, controversial. I don't even want to say which one we're picking, but we're picking one of those.
Okay.
Because it doesn't really matter which one we pick. We've got certain reasons. Right. It's not to say that one is any better than the other, quite frankly. We have some thoughts on that.
See this.
All right, audio's back.
Audio's back. We think audio's back.
Sorry about that.
Should be back.
All right. So we were talking about picking a
JavaScript
framework because again, I'm fitting this in with tools.
Hey, we're up.
Earlier we talked
Rich.
about thanks Rich for.
Wow, that's
blessing and a curse. It's thanks, Rich, for getting it back. I think Rich was the one who kind of kicked us off the air to begin with.
Did you hit a button?
I was trying to put a title up and everything locked up on
the
title.
Gosh.
So sorry.
It's all
Is
right.
your mic up? Because I know sometimes you turn your mic down when there's a problem. Just make sure you're
back
up.
I'm good.
So yeah, I think it's that's an example where it's pretty safe, it's pretty fair, it's pretty reasonable to pick something.
Okay.
Again, it has to
Yeah.
do with a talent pool within our organization and allowing developers to collaborate and help each other and support each other. But when it comes to something like a JavaScript framework, let me add a couple things to that. And from my perspective, this is an example where I say it's only as temporary or as permanent as it is, right? We're picking framework today. I think we're going to have it for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to have it in 2 years? Who knows, right? But I don't know if this is where you're going with this, but a lot of times in the JavaScript world and in a lot of other worlds, we're adding small libraries all the time. We're using little NuGet packages that do this or that, right? We are not locking down our NuGet usage. We're not locking down the dependencies that we can bring in. I know there are organizations that say, if you want to use a NuGet package, you got to go through like a whole approval process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a while. And I don't want to be that company. However, if we get burned on it, we end up, we could obviously become that company because you can see how that could get into play.
Like I was leaning more towards just narrowing the question to JavaScript frameworks because you don't get away from that. And forget JavaScript, right? If you built an application with ASP.NET Web Forms, you don't get away from that choice ever unless you decide to restart.
Full rebuild. It's a full rebuild.
Same thing with ASP.NET MVC or ASP.NET Core MVC or Razor Pages or even Blazor.
Right.
You're committing to something.
Yeah.
Now, and I understand that our friends in ASP.NET Core might say, look, we're more interoperable than ever. You could build Razor components and use them in different... Fine. Sure. I'll concede all that. But the fact of the matter is, if you picked Angular, you're Angular for a project. So that's why I classed it the same as making your choice to say we're going to standardize on Entity Framework. We're going to standardize on Swagger. I like the Swagger pick because it told me more than the Entity Framework pick, which just simply says the Entity Framework, and I'm going to minimize the pick, which is totally unfair. The Entity Framework pick says, I don't want to learn about a lot of ORMs, and I don't want my developers to learn a lot of ORMs unless and until it is proven that we need one.
Mm-hmm.
The Swagger pick says, this tool will help us build better web APIs.
That's right.
And that's to me, that's a slight, I mean, I know I split hairs a lot on this show, but that's what I liked about that pick. Is it was,
I don't have any hairs left.
was we're going to use this tool because we will do a better job.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
There's a reason behind it, right? It's important to our end users that we have that. Now, that goes along in a bigger topic of we have some standards around documentation in general.
Oh, yeah.
But we don't want to go down that path.
I mean, there's a whole other show. You know what I like about this is I'm going to have to watch this show back because I think we've got about 8 other shows.
Oh, because each one of these could be, totally, right.
For example,
well, I got to need them because I got to learn how to do Swagger. I don't know how to do it.
If we're going to pick and choose between JavaScript frameworks, then how does innovation happen, right? How does the organization say, you know what, it does look like the new one, JavaScript framework 2021 is wow. This really blew my socks off. I like this. Probably invented by Steve Sanderson, I'm sure, because he's only shocked the world a couple times with client framework innovations.
Right.
Yeah.
And if Steve's watching, I sincerely mean that when he blew the world away with Knockout and then did it again with Blazor. I think I respect what he's done a lot.
You think he's watching?
No, but I would be thrilled if Steve Sanderson watched that clip. I really would.
Sure.
I think if you could ever go and find the mix conference video, which may still be out there, where he introduces Knockout to the world, I honestly think you can hear gasps in the audience when the binding is working.
Oh yeah.
And then when he does the same thing with Blazor at an NDC conference, I think if I remember correctly, it was David Fowler who was practically live tweeting along with it, and was just saying that his brain had exploded.
Right.
And so I do respect the innovation. To me, that's innovation. When you get giants in the industry to say, "What did you do?" Like that's innovation, right? So we've come up with quite a list of things that you have decided belong in standards. We've also talked about what doesn't belong in standards. I hesitate to add another one, but the only thing that I think we might use as a little bit of a teaser is that I think we also, because we talked a little bit about this standards, partially because a lot of the times on this show we like to just have an organic conversation, but I think if we didn't, then it would have been too like, well, what did you do? Is you also have a prescription for the application architecture, which I don't think we can share because we'd have to bring up a chart and it's probably too much to get into tonight.
We could talk a little bit about some of the concepts
right
there, I think.
But I think the key was, and you said this right off the bat, is the architecture works because typically in your business there's a certain problem that you have to solve again and again and again. So if we even just brought it up, I think the disclaimer would be, this might not work for you in what you do, or maybe not.
Yeah. Well, so when I do talks and about architecture, and when I talk about architecture, I'm talking about like application architecture, application design architecture. I always say, and this is part of, you often refer to my old end-to-end workshop that I did, which was really fun, is that you have to choose these design patterns or whatever you want to call it that solve a problem for you. Now, truthfully, I think that the pattern that so what is the problem we're trying to solve? Most times, I think the de facto problem that most companies have, most enterprises that are building software, like the kind of stuff we do, I think, line of business apps and things like that. The problem is maintainability, right? The problem is we want our code needs to be clean, and it's not, right? Our code needs to be testable, and it's not. Our code needs to be maintainable. I need to be able to go in and solve a problem or add a feature easily. And I lean on patterns that work towards that, because those are the problems that we generally have. That doesn't mean we don't have real business problems, right? But most of those business problems don't affect that level of design decision, right? An example I would use as a contrast to that would be if I was writing one of those investment, the software that like has to find out when a stock changes. I'm probably not going to explain it right. And they're even at the point where they're moving those systems closer to Wall Street, I guess, right? Because they want to be like milliseconds closer to the
high-speed transactions. We've all heard about somebody gets up and gives a talk about how they needed to do millions of trades a second, and if they didn't, they could cost them billions of dollars.
I don't have that problem.
Yeah.
Right? Matter of fact, like again, we use the entity framework example. If my code was it's probably not the right word. A tenth of a second slower, it wouldn't change anything, right? So we lean on patterns that make for code maintainability. Really, that's what we do. And so we put together some standard that we think we want all of the teams to start to follow. And it's a standard that's been already embraced before it was the standard. There's a few teams that are already doing it, and other teams that are doing some stuff awfully close to it already, and some teams that aren't doing anything like that. But it goes back towards, generally speaking, things like solid principles, particularly single responsibility, right? It leans on the orchestrator pattern, which sort of you need if you're doing single responsibility. You need something to execute all those single responsibility objects, things like that. And we have some other things that we think that are helpful. Also repository pattern. So we built this out in a way that we can show it that we want teams using the repository pattern, using the unit of work pattern, using the orchestrator pattern, using single responsibility, and some other stuff that I'm not really thinking of right now. And if we're going to say that, usually the response then is, well, how do we get started doing all that stuff? And so we're giving a little bit of a playbook that say, hey, if you built your application following this guideline, it will get you there, right? This is a good way to do it. And it has some naming conventions, and it has a couple of additional things, even some folder structure, which you could argue is very, very specific. I said I don't want to micromanage people, but in the standard of the way to build the application, the architecture, It even sort of goes so far as to say you could organize your classes into these kind of folders, and it's going to help. I wouldn't go berserk if someone didn't follow that folder structure kind of thing, but it is actually helpful. Like it's helpful to just know that when I go to this application, anything that is a repo is going to be like in the repos folder. It's in the repos folder.
Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. This folder thing. This is not rocket science, right? Yeah. But we do have like a folder for like anything that is a validator, right? Like any of those classes that you give it an object and it spits out some broken rules or something like that. Those are validators. Let's put them in the validators folder. You know, don't just leave everything all floating around.
Right.
And it goes in more. And I would be happy to do it. To walk through the diagram and talk a little about it.
It depends on if it's something we want to do on this show.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I think what we could do.
I am doing it on my show, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. And so, so I don't know if there's any way we can bring this up, but you've been chatting in the Mixer chat, and your handle for Mixer, Twitch, and Twitch, right? Is Schwami Streams.
Schwami Streams. But
when I see Schwami that way, that's when I say Schwammy.
So Schwami Streams is my handle, right? And so that's right. It's right in there already. So my channel, I'm doing a stream. Wednesdays at noon.
Did I bring that? Or
actually, we'll get it in the wrap up. So go ahead.
We'll get in the wrap up. I'm just saying, Schwami Streams at noon on Wednesdays. And what I'm doing is I'm building out. I have a whole laundry list of things we want to do. There's going to be crossover, by the way, of topics. I'm sure.
Sure.
Right? Things we're talking about here. So, but I'm building an application because you need a code base to be able to try Blazor, to be able to try gRPC, whatever. I need a code base. So I'm building a little bit of a CRUD application. Kind of simple. But when I build it, I'm following all these kind of patterns that I like, and I'm trying to walk through them sort of step by step and show ways. So, I'm not just building a CRUD application that's sort of throw together. I'm trying to think like, how would I do this in the enterprise, in the work environment? How would I build this application? And so that's where it is now. We're really just getting started. Today I put like a first repo in a repository in there, and things like that.
Do you use Restream for that? Just curious.
I do use Restream for that. Yeah, I'm on 3 YouTube, Mixer, and Twitch.
YouTube probably you don't have the
I don't have a great URL.
The URL
is
yet,
the problem.
but don't worry, you'll get 200 subscribers soon.
Yeah, and then you can Google or not Google. You can search YouTube. YouTube's pretty searchable. If you search Schwami Streams with or without a space, you find it.
Do you have a central URL for the site that you're creating?
Figure that out,
So I haven't deployed it yet, but I will.
Okay.
And it might be something we can even use some of the code samples in here because, we have like limited time and it's kind of hard to always, we've had time, like think about this the other, couple weeks ago, you wanted to do that API management.
Yep.
And you had to build an API to sort of show it.
Sure.
Well, we could use my, I'll have an API.
Right.
Do things like that.
But so I think we'll probably come back to this, and I think we'd be able to look at your pattern, which we did. There's a visual there, and I even think that's probably a good whole show. So I think what might be good is if we can come back to my screen.
Oh yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And I don't know. Well, I was asking. I wasn't saying you should have already done it. And then I don't know if you want to put us over top of it. That's fine.
Yeah, put us over top of it. I always like that.
I look at this as a wrap up. So this is, I took a lot of notes tonight, and hopefully you weren't too distracted by me typing while Andy was talking into the camera.
I thought you were chatting with your friends or something like that. No.
No. And so one of the first things you talked about was code reviews, but I realized that was leading in. So, we said if you're going to establish developer standards for your organization, right? We talked a lot. We said, let's avoid the ivory tower. And I really liked when we all zeroed in on that word. Let's create the minimum standards. And that's why that's highlighted. And the purpose of this is not to micromanage via standards. Okay. Now through the rest of this, I highlighted in blue. Easy for me to say, right? I highlighted in blue everywhere that I think we have a future show waiting for us. So you can see that in the development culture, the purpose of creating standards is to create a development culture, a community within your organization so that you can all work together, collaborate easier, even work across projects without having this whole set of training and retraining. And I kind of tried to say, here's what his team isn't going to care about, and here's what they are going to care about. And we're totally picking on Andy and all the work he's done here, but it's something you had to do for your job, so it felt really great to kind of bring it to the community. You're not going to care about things like tab size, but you should write idiomatic .NET code. Not going to care about. You are going to care about using a specific source control, and your choice was Git. Git is obviously very relevant to people. I'm sure we could do show after show on Git. Don't care what the tooling is. It's the outcome that's more important. You don't care whether I use Visual Studio Code, Git Kraken, the command line. Just the commit needs to go in based on your standards using feature branches and unit test passing, getting it back into the master, getting to the automated deployments. You care that you have a DevOps process. You're going to use ARM templates. That's a great show topic. You're going to use YAML instead of a designer. Great show topic to get to understand YAMLs, right? Not going to right-click publish. That's not what a development organization should do. Might be fine when you're learning, but you better figure out how to automate.
Yeah.
You want teams to use solid principles. There's a whole set of shows on getting better at solid principles, but it's not going to be a gate that stops builds. It's more of the Zen-like state at the top of the mountain that you want everyone to get to.
Yeah, that's a good. I like the way you're sort of summarizing these things, because I think it sort of shows the concepts that I'm going for a little bit more than the concepts more than the detail, right?
Yeah. People can just watch the show, and you don't even have to have your meetings anymore.
No,
just watch the show.
Yeah, it's so great. I was actually thinking if we did this really well, I could just tell all the developers. You're talking about not people in the world. You're talking about people in my organization.
It's going to be in tomorrow's
can come here and watch this.
Yeah. So you want people to unit test. You want them to increase code coverage. I love when Rich said, "Leave the code better than you found it."
Yes.
But we're not going to do things like say, if you don't get to 25%, the build stops.
Right.
But of course, if a unit test fails, the build stops.
Now, by the way, I would be really happy and encouraged if a particular team said, you know what, we want to have a standard that we're going to get to a certain level of, like if they want to all come together and agree upon that, like a sub team of developers, and they want to do that. This doesn't mean that they can't sort of, do that.
So there's a whole other show here, is that I'm a big fan of requirements coverage over code coverage.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that there are methods to code requirements coverage. That's like a whole set of shows. So that's not even listed here. I really loved when you pointed out that we're going to use Swagger, and we already had the conversation why, a tool to help you do a better job writing web APIs. Some of these other ones I didn't highlight because I don't know that they're necessarily other shows. It doesn't mean it's not good advice. Like it doesn't mean it's not good advice. It's just I don't know that we need a whole show to talk about whether you should pick among JavaScript frameworks. We talked about it.
Yeah.
But that there was a key distinction in that it doesn't mean you can't use a client-side library. Like Moment is a library.
Moment.
Angular is a framework. When you pick Angular, you have made a choice. You are going to live with that choice a long time.
Right.
You could stop using Moment and use another time-based library pretty quickly.
Yep.
And then when we didn't get to show a lot of this, but you talked about one of the things that you are going to try to get to is, hey, there's good application architecture that solves our business problems, which we laid out. And at the end, when you started naming them off, there's a show, there's a show, there's a show, there's a show. Yeah. Like, what's good project folder organization? What's the repository pattern? What's unit of work? What does that look like? How can we put it up on screen and show people when you're breaking things down into single responsibility? Can we bring up classes and projects that are doing too much? Can we break them apart on stream? This is all stuff we can try. But the key is I wanted to answer this question, and I don't know that I got a lot of these answers, and it's okay that we didn't get them all tonight. Why are you doing this? And I think what I got out of it is it lowers the barriers for developers to collaborate. It makes them more agile and nimble. Now, at the same time, I think, it also to...
There's one, there's a little bit more. Yeah, what were you going to say?
More likely to produce correct code.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know if that's the way I word it, right? But the idea here is that we've learned from our mistakes, right? This is the whole idea behind what is a best practice or what is a what is a pattern? Patterns are discovered; they're not invented, right? That's something I've heard before. It's not my words, but patterns are discovered. You look and you see over and over again, hey, there's a pattern here. We have patterns of things that have worked successfully, and we could discover things that have worked. Sorry, I don't good and bad.
Right.
So basically, this is a way to also say we've had teams that have done this successfully. We think it's going to help solve your problems as well, right? And in addition, we also now have. I guess this goes to collaboration, but it's a little different than collaboration, but it enables support. It enables a support structure. Okay, collaboration I think of as often as like us working together and building something cool. How about you're stuck?
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
You've got a problem. You don't know how to get this, and you come over to me and you go, hey, Andy, I'm following the standard. You've been using that thing for 2 years. Like you've got a support system now, which is a little different than the pure collaboration maybe that I think you were going for.
Right? I think you're right. And that's what the developers being more agile is. I was trying to find a way to say that if you do ask me for help, the first question out of my mouth is, so hold on, how does this framework work again?
Yeah, right.
How does this thing work again?
Give me a 30-minute tutorial on how this thing works.
And then what was the point, right?
Yeah. And we're going to have that still. Don't get me wrong.
Sure. These things
I want to be really careful. Like, not everybody's going to know everything. We're getting closer. We're getting better, right?
Earlier, you talked about exceptions. And so I do have a final question.
Not exceptions like code throwing exceptions. We didn't get to that as a topic.
Is that when a team is going to be allowed to do something that even we go back up here and it says, you got to do this? You said that if there's going to be an exception, it should be noted. That was the term you used. And I wrote down, you did say that it avoids making it seem like differences are okay. Yeah, I think I restated something you said.
It's kind of,
But I then sort of summed it up as that it's because exceptions were allowed after reason and deliberation.
Yes.
Now, where are they noted?
So, it depends on what that exception is, right? If that exception is like in code, like we don't have this, but let's just say we had the rule that says you can't use var, and you used var, that's a good place for a code comment, right? Well, here's the reason why I'm doing this a little differently than you would expect. We are going to have documentation. There's documentation for applications, and we need to get better at that. But in an applications architecture diagram, that might be a place where you would put that. As you were getting to this one part, I want to bring up one other thing that we haven't talked about. This is something that, if I do say so myself, I'm kind of proud of. Is what we came up with is this idea that as we roll this out to different teams. This is where I think to myself, I've been watching like management videos and trying to be better, like not recently, but like in my career, I've really tried to be, to help drive change and things like that. And I've tried to be focused on it. After each one of these workshops, the reason it's called a workshop, we do a lot of interactive conversation about this. We're coming up with an action plan at the end of the workshop. Okay. The action plan, talk about, you say, when are exceptions okay, right? The action plan is going to say, your team might not even care about this whole half of the guidelines for 6 more months. I don't care. Don't even worry about it. We're going to have an action plan that's going to be so broad that say, you guys are exempt from this. You got other fish to fry. Don't worry about Swagger. We're trying to learn Solid or whatever it is, right? So there is where certain exceptions will be sort of noted, like in this action plan. Yeah, this thing's blinking like crazy. Yeah. I see you're looking at it. I don't know what you think about that, but in this action plan, there will be a lot of exceptions noted or areas to focus on will be brought up. Then we're also doing what's called an architecture review process. And in that architecture review process, it will also be a chance to note exceptions and stuff like that. You're staring at, that was his machine, I guess.
Yeah, I think my machine's doing it. Anyways, everything you needed to see for Swammy Streams was there. But so if you're watching on YouTube, roll back about 20 seconds. You can see that he's on Mixer, he's on Twitch, noon on Wednesdays is your current plan. There's an archive on YouTube. Do I have your Twitter handle right?
Swami,
So you can get announcements there. That's all Eastern time.
Thanks for plugging me.
And it's just that as we're blinking a lot like here, crazy, so we're probably going to go back to just talking while we wrap this up. Yeah.
So I was talking about this action plan. And because you were asking about documentation, where
Yeah,
do we
where do you
document
put it?
exceptions? And the action plan is part of that, is to say that we know that you're not compliant. Sounds like a hard word, but we know that you're not going to be compliant with these things because there's all new technology in here, all new terminology for people, all new patterns and stuff like that. We want to enable, what we're trying to do is enable developers to be successful. And if we just dump this whole process out and go, here's the document, see you next year,
Yeah, right.
you know, then
You
it's
may
a
never
failure.
see it. Yeah, right.
And I
Sure.
think that's like, hopefully that's an important takeaway for people, that if you're going to roll this out, like, be strategic about how you roll this out, how you empower your developers. The whole point is to make things better, not worse.
The whole point is to make things better, not worse.
Words of
Words to
wisdom.
live by.
There
The
you go.
words of wisdom
And
by
there's-
Swami.
There's the parable, proverb for the show. We might even name
Change
the
the
show
title. I
that
think so.
to
Make things better, not worse.
the whole point.
People are home going, that Swami is
I actually think,
insightful.
to be quite
This
honest,
guy,
it's
it's insightful.
you know, we make fun of it, right? We make fun of it, but you're not. It's if you watching this video on YouTube
Thanks,
in the
Bruno.
future, first of all, let us know who's going to win the Super Bowl.
Back to the Future
Right,
here? Yeah.
right. Because if you're watching in the future, hopefully it was a great game. But second, have you worked in an organization where documents like this are published and then promptly ignored? Because I have,
Mm-hmm.
So
and I
have
don't
I.
even think they're ignored out of malice or because it just you got work to do. So you put it aside.
The biggest barrier is we're already up against all these deadlines. How are we supposed to learn new techniques or whatever?
Yes, you put it
And
aside.
it's not. It's fair.
Yeah,
I get
sure.
it.
Yeah.
They're not wrong.
You put it aside, and so what happens is eventually somebody else joins the company, and you're the person onboarding them, and they say, well, hey, do you have like a coding standard? You say, oh yeah, and you even send them the link, and you go, but you know, I haven't read it myself for 3. And so what was the point?
Right.
Right.
So and I want to be careful. This isn't a coding standard. You are trying to create a whole development guidance set of standards. It covers a lot of things. It covers code. It also covers architecture, covers tooling. It covers practices. We didn't talk about pair programming. We didn't talk about
That's in
a
there.
lot of. I know it was in there.
Right, yeah.
We didn't get to cover it all. We could probably spend the rest of this year refining the document every week.
I would love
at
to do that, quite frankly.
At 8:30 Eastern
It'd be
on the
great.
Dev Talk Show, but you may want to hear us talk about some different things. What I like about it is we got a lot of great ideas for future shows that could dive more directly into code or talk about these practices. So I really think, I want to thank you, Andy, for sharing what is work, and even your organization for allowing us to talk about development practices that you're going to put into place. And hopefully we've all learned from it. And hopefully you've learned from them or can share your ideas with us in the comments, right?
It would be
Absolutely.
great.
Yeah.
Love to hear back from other people about, some of these things like, spaces versus tabs. There might be people go, are you crazy? You have to document that.
Yeah.
Spaces. What's the right approach? There's not a right answer
Unless you're using YAML.
unless you're using YAML.
And
I
it
told somebody
counts.
about that today. Spaces count. YAML. Yeah. So, what else is going on?
Well, I mean, in the .NET world last week, we talked about this a little bit. There was the focus on Blazor workshop. And look, .NET Core 3.1 and Blazor is going to dominate conversation for quite a while. And, I'm sure we'll get back to it right on this show.
Somebody asked on LinkedIn today, have you seen, not to me, but I read, someone said, have you seen any Blazor in production yet? Or your company's doing any Blazor in production? I believe there's go live with Blazor server side.
Blazor
stuff.
server is production ready.
Production ready. But, the question was, and I said, well, certainly I think we're going to start seeing a lot of it soon, but most people I know, do you know anyone that's doing, just curious, like...
Personally, I'm not going to count people who have on streams and so forth said they're using it.
I'm not talking about that.
So
Right,
personally,
Right.
no, not yet. But
Yeah,
there's
same.
But there's
I've
sure
seen
going to be a lot of
excitement.
stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of excitement.
I've seen a lot of
Definitely.
excitement. And, Philly.net in February
Oh, yeah. What's coming up? Yeah.
and this is huge, is having Carl Franklin is coming here to Philly.net to the Microsoft MTC here in Malvern. He's bringing his roadshow, his Blazer roadshow here. Carl Franklin, if you don't know, and is the creator of .NET Rocks and one of the co-hosts. They've done, I believe, they're well over 1,600 episodes now.
Yep.
And really, our show wouldn't be here without them. There's no doubt about it. And I don't think any .NET podcast exists without the trailblazing that they did in that space.
Yeah, they're the godfathers of this whole thing.
It makes you even wonder
Carl
if .NET
Richard
itself, the trailblazing of them having show after show introducing people to .NET.
Yeah.
The impact that they might have had is completely immeasurable. We don't know. But he's coming here,
and
we're going to have
.NET Rocks TV at one point,
yeah,
which is probably closer to what we're doing, attempting to do here. But
he's going to be here, and he's going to be on the Dev Talk Show.
Yeah.
So that is going to be fantastic.
I'm going to let you ask him.
And we're going to be more nervous than you've ever seen us trying to figure out how to have a great interview with someone who interviews the rest of us better than anyone can.
Be like having Terry Gross come on the show. Right?
It's true.
Right. Yeah, right.
Like she's like,
let's just have Walter Cronkite come on and talk to him about interviewing.
That'd be impressive.
Let's talk to him about interviewing, right? Yeah, what do you know about interviewing?
Yeah, exactly.
So in any case, that's going to be fantastic, and we hope you join us for that.
Yeah.
So
we'll have to make some definite studio changes to fit 3 people around the mic.
That's going to be a ton of fun, though.
Yeah.
So anything else? We covered a lot, and we got a little bit over an hour and a half. Hopefully this was a good show for you. And I do want to hear from you in the comments.
Yeah.
What practices do you have in your coding standards, or do you wish you had? Is your development standards document sitting in SharePoint or Jive and nobody even remembers the link? Or do you open page 17 frequently and point it at your teammates and say, why aren't you doing this?
Page 17, yeah.
Page 17 is a big one.
Page 17 is a good one.
Let us know. Let us know in the comments on YouTube. And if you like what we're talking about here, please hit the like button. And if you think you want to see more shows like this, subscribe to the channel. When we get to 100 subscribers, we can get a nice URL so that you don't have to search for us.
We do have a nice URL.
Well, that's true. You can find us at video.thedevtalkshow.com.
Yeah.
Which is probably, a nicer URL than remembering the YouTube one anyway. So
probably is. Yeah. Anyway.
So anything else? Or are we good? Yeah, it was a fun show. It got very
I like these talk shows. The show is called the Dev Talk Show.
Dev Talk Show,
and I like these conversational ones. I really do. I enjoy it. I feel like I learn from you guys a lot. Well, I guess I learn from you guys no matter what we do, but
same, yeah.
I like these personally.
Don't always have to be showing code.
What's that?
You don't always have to be showing code.
Right.
Yeah.
No, this was a lot of fun. So thank you again. And I guess if that's it for tonight, then thank you to Rich for everything behind the camera, getting us back online.
He's all
when a technical problem beyond anyone's possible control occred. So thank you.
And I'm asking him questions. I'm like, "Hey, Rich, can you check?" He's like, "I'm trying to fix the thing." I'm like, "Can you tell me if how's my lighting? Is my lighting look good? This is important over here."
So thanks for everything you do behind the camera. Andy Schwam for bringing this incredible topic to us tonight, and for the two of them, I'm Chris Gomez, and we will see you next Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time on the Dev Talk Show.
Thanks to everybody who's watching.
Oh yeah, thanks for everybody tuning in.
Bruno
and
and Chops for tuning in tonight and for participating. Bruno, we really appreciate it. It helped us out quite a bit. We'll see you all next time.
Good night.